Morning Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined today by Anne Michelle Ellis. She is the coordinator of CASE, Coalition Against Sexual Exploitation in San Bernardino County. It pains me that we are talking about this, but it's an important topic.
Sure.
What exactly is CASE? Talk to us about the coalition.
Sure, yeah. The coalition is really a partnership of 9 departments of the County of San Bernardino along with the juvenile courts. And early on, DA Ramos,
Mike Ramos, the DA of this county.
Correct, yeah. He really saw the need for a unified response around these issues. It's not just a law enforcement issue. It's not just a child welfare issue or a mental health issue, and it really takes all of us. So those 9 departments have come together to raise awareness and also provide services to kids who've been trafficked.
And I had the honor of interviewing Mr. Ramos on this topic a few years ago in connection with the documentary that his office produced with Christopher Lee, who's his PIO. We were pleased to be able to air that full documentary on our television network. Wonderful, of course, but devastating.
Of course,
totally devastating.
For sure.
I have 2 daughters, 13 and almost 11, and the thought that even they are targets at that young age.
For sure, yeah.
Talk to us about what you see day in and day out, because I believe that most of us believe that those that are being sexually exploited, being trafficked, being smuggled, oh, they're from Asia, they're from Latin America. Equally as horrific, but it's not the case.
It's not here, right? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the majority of the public feels that way. You know, they've seen the CNN specials, they've seen things, you know, documentaries on television and whatnot, and a lot of the focus has been overseas. And unfortunately, what we're finding is that the same things happen here in the United States. We just don't necessarily see it the same way.
Why?
Well, I think that because of our ideas around prostitution, quite honestly, you know, the stereotypes and that kind of thing, we tend to see these young people as having a choice in it. Well, they must be choosing this, or they must be supporting a drug habit or something like that. But I think when people understand that the average age of entry into prostitution in the United States is 12 to 13. Domestic, that's right, yeah, domestic kids. So, and I think people start thinking about it a little bit differently. You know, even if a 12 or 13-year-old is saying that they choose this, how much do they understand those choices, and how much do they understand the consequences of those choices?
How are these 12-year-olds becoming prostitutes? What is happening?
Yeah, so I think one of the factors that sort of plays into all this and sort of creates a perfect storm, in a sense, is the fact that about 80 to 90% of them have been sexually abused as children. So from a very young age, they have very different ideas about healthy relationships and what's okay, you know, and so a lot of them have been removed from the care and custody of their families, and now they're in group homes and foster placement, which, you know, sometimes is a good thing, and as we all know, sometimes not such a great thing. And so an older man comes along, maybe he's good looking and drives a nice car and tells her she's beautiful and she's valuable and he's going to take care of her, and she may have been waiting her entire life to hear those things.
It's a father figure in a way.
Absolutely, and in fact they call him daddy, and so this is daddy to her, and it's very manipulative, very subtle. It's very rarely do we see, you know, kidnapping off the street and blindfolding and being held with chains. You know, this is somebody that she sees as her boyfriend, somebody that she's chosen to do this with.
And the boyfriend then literally pimps her out.
Correct, yeah.
And that's when it gets really dangerous.
Absolutely.
On so many levels.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, the amount of trauma that these young people undergo, and I want to bring up the fact that it's not just girls, that boys are just as vulnerable as girls are, but the amount of trauma that they endure day in and day out is horrific, and in fact they have higher rates of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than people returning from war situations in a lot of cases. So this is, you know, once they're out of the situation, what we see a lot of the times is them running back to the trafficker, even when they are in services and so on.
Why?
Very similar to domestic violence. So we understand that manipulation, absolutely, this bonding, this trauma bonding that happens with their trafficker. And so, you know, it's our role to continue to work with them, regardless of how many times they run back to him, show them that there is another way of life, but it's a long process.
Are these girls in school? I mean,
sometimes they are. Sometimes they are. So the traffickers know that people are going to pay a little closer attention if this child is absent from school. So it's not unusual. And when we go out and speak to educators and folks in our schools, we talk a lot about, you know, paying paying attention to those kids that are not able to stay awake in class or
what are the signs?
Yeah, some of the signs can be, you know, a young person who all of a sudden is showing up with expensive jewelry and clothing. You know, their family doesn't have a whole lot of extra resources, and all of a sudden they've got the new iPhone or a Coach handbag, those kinds of things. And when you ask about it, they say, oh, my boyfriend gave it to me, or, you know, my friend gave it to me.
My boyfriend, 12, 13 years old? I mean...
Right. And a lot of people will be going, well, that doesn't sound, you know, but who's going to start asking the actual questions about, well, who is this boyfriend, and how did you meet him, and those kinds of things.
You mentioned something earlier, and I think it's important that we emphasize that we do have certain perceptions of prostitutes. And
for sure.
What I've learned over the years is that these girls, part of the challenge they face is they are charged in the criminal justice system as prostitutes.
Right. Traditionally, that's how law enforcement has handled these cases.
And I understand that there is a sea change on this. I know in Los Angeles County, the district attorney is looking at changing that approach.
Correct.
I'm not sure what's happening in this county, but more philosophically, what's your sense of the whole question of criminal charges?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that these are children.
Right.
And so, you know, we all know the legal age of consent is 18. And so in my mind, and in the mind of a lot of others who are fighting trafficking, is the fact that, you know, as a child, can you even legally make that choice? You know, and yet you're being held accountable for a crime that technically you can't consent to. So this really, I mean, I think the discussion has shifted to the fact that this is child sexual abuse for profit is really what's happening here.
Obviously, the pimps are deplorable.
Yep.
And it's very easy to say that the Johns are deplorable. But at the same time, I wonder whether we need to at least look at the Johns and say, are they appropriate for some type of intervention?
For sure. I mean, you know, I definitely think that's something that needs to be addressed a little bit more. We talk a lot about, you know, how traffickers traffic young women and some of the victimization and that kind of thing. You hear about that far more often than you do sort of the demand side of things. And this really is a business, the bottom line.
Often, and again, I am making no excuses, they have no idea how old these girls are. Well, okay, but again, I'm not making excuses. Please don't get me wrong. I mean, it is deplorable.
Sure, for sure.
But my point is that, you know, look, these Johns are going to go to jail for a few months and they're going to get out. Right. And so can a coalition like yours also work with them? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah,
Or not so much your coalition, but can we as society approach the demand side, as you say?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we can. I think it turns into a larger sort of conversation about our culture and the over-sexualization of youth. Well, the fact that sex is seen as a commodity, the whole idea that, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, this sort of, you know, bachelor party, and that sex is something that you can purchase, and that's okay. It's just, you know, it's what's done. And I really think it's up to the men in our communities to stand up and say this is not okay, and our children shouldn't be for sale.
Talk to us about some of the women, some of the girls that have come out on the other side. I can tell in your eyes that it's happened.
Yes.
And that it is electric when it does.
It's just amazing. It really is. And we work with several adult survivors, and these are women that are, you know, usually typically in their late 30s or early 40s. And I'll tell you what, these are some of the most amazing women that I think I've ever had the privilege of meeting and working alongside. You know, just the resiliency and the strength that it takes. I mean, I admit that, you know, if I had been through even a tenth of what some of these girls had been through, I think I'd be locked in a mental institution somewhere. And yet they come through it with such strength and resolve, and not only making it through the situation themselves, but then being willing to advocate on the behalf of young people that are going through the situation.
What about, you know, when you do come in contact with the 15-year-old. How do you make sure that they come out on the other side?
That's a tough thing. Yeah, it really is. It's a challenge. It really is a challenge, you know, and I think that when we start having these conversations about what's most effective, it's including survivors in that conversation. You know, I was really, really pleased that several months ago, San Bernardino PD, along with the Sheriff's Department and other law enforcement agencies, did an operation in San Bernardino. And it was the first time that they brought adult survivors into the operation to be on the front lines when these girls are being discovered, to be on the receiving end of young women, so that they're not just coming up against law enforcement, you know?
I just have to thank you. I thank you on behalf of all fathers, of all daughters, of all sons. I mean, you're doing really remarkable work. Her name is Michelle Ellis. She is with the Coalition Against Sexual Exploitation in San Bernardino County. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.